Not everything that goes bump in the night is harmless. Paranormal M explores the sinister side of true stories and unexplained events. Subscribe and hit the bell before the next bump comes knocking. Footsteps and a nosy little girl. I had a colonoscopy yesterday, and I was up late the night before due to having to use the bathroom a lot. It's due to the prep not being able to take my melatonin gummies because of the clear liquid diet. I've been sleeping on the couch in our family room. It's close to the bathroom and easier to get up from quickly. The family room happens to be where the stairs that lead to the top floor of the house are. The top floor is where the most activity has happened over the years, including something knocking like religious items off the wall and too high for the cats to reach, and nobody had been in my room to knock it down. Plus, the nail was still on the wall despite it being loose. Something also once almost got me in trouble with my brother because he saw me in his room when he pulled up from a friend's house, only to find out I was across town at her grandma's. After he moved out, I would hear something stand up from his squeaky futon bunk bed set, walk heavily across the floor of his room, then back to bed, sit down when I was in the family room. Since I've been sleeping in the family room, I've discovered that there are still footsteps on and off at night, but I ignored it because it usually stays upstairs and leaves me alone, as long as I don't mess with it. I finally dozed off around 3, only to be woken back up almost immediately by a little girl's voice yelling hello in my ear really loudly. I opened my eyes and I saw nothing, but it scared the hell out of me. I was super tired at the time, so quickly fell back to sleep. But I do remember that it had nothing to do with the dream I was having. What's in the trees? As some of you may recall, I posted a few months ago about living in a house where several people, including myself, have experienced sleep paralysis for the first time. I only had it while there, and I'm thankful to report that we're no longer there and will likely be torn down due to a lot of unrelated reasons, even though we did get illegally evicted. Since being illegally evicted, we wound up in an old camper at our buddy's family's home. I had heard stories of something pursuing my fiancé across this property from the treetops, back when he lived in a shack on the same property. The owner of the shack told him it's just a bear, even as he argued that bears can leap treetop to treetop. It's just a bear. Don't worry about it. Just a bear. Even as everybody present heard it land on the roof and pace all night, it's just a bear. Well, now that we're in the camper, the quote-unquote bear seems to be enjoying itself. My first night, I was here alone as my fiancé had an emergency. I heard something scratching up and down the camper all night. I kept telling myself it was just branches, and I've since been behind the camper and there's no trees, just grass. The next day, my fiancé was able to get here. We're walking out of the house. It's about 25 yards or so from the camper, which is where our buddy lives. I heard my fiancé's extremely distinctive laugh from 10-15 feet in front of me, behind a stack of old tires. It was so realistic that I caught myself trying to lean and peek around the tires. Then I remembered the night before and the stories I'd heard about this property. I reminded myself that I am not that white. Land looked toward the camper. My fiancé was in there putting stuff away, so I gently hurried my ass to the camper, being careful not to run and alert what was fucking with me to the fact that I knew it was fucking with me, and/or trying to lure me to my death. I asked him if he'd been watching something or saw something funny or laughed at something, anything. Nope. He'd been there in silence since he'd gotten there a few minutes before me. Since I'd had to grab all, he'd forgotten to. I explained what had happened, and we didn't really talk more about it. That is until he heard our buddy's voice calling his name outside the window of the camper that night. Nobody was there, and he and his girlfriend both swore he never left the house. Then I took my opportunity for an "I told you so." He had believed me the whole time, though, and just didn't want to make a big deal of it and get it excited. We've had a lot of minor stuff in the week since. Mostly knocks or footsteps on the roof. Fiancé thought he saw an arm out the window last night. The general feeling of being watched every few times we leave the camper. That is, until tonight. Out of nowhere, something started knocking up and down the camper. And it's a fifth wheel, so it would knock at the door, in the bathroom, and in the bedroom area. That's where we were settling in. Then back to the bathroom and then to the door. It was at a semi-human speed, just slightly too fast for the terrain outside. My fiancé insisted on looking out and saw nothing. He then insisted on retrieving my hunting knife from the car, along with something to better secure the door. It's an old camper, so the door's broken. We'd been trying to shut, but it wasn't especially secure from the inside. Just enough to keep our 3 cats from letting themselves out. Thankfully, he made it to the car and back okay, but he looked super sketched out when he came back in. I asked if he'd seen something. He told me that he had heard something knocking further down the property. It was toward the house of our buddy and his girlfriend. Then he said he'd heard branches crack high up. We tied the door much more securely with an old electrical cord. The camper had been sort of a used junk store before us. We secured our cats in cupboards and kennels and closed the partition between the living and dining area and the bathroom and bedroom area. We cranked the sound on the game that we're playing, but we can still hear occasional knocking and sometimes just one, most recently a bunch in rapid succession. We aren't sure what it could be, and we're in the rural Midwest near several reservations. They most certainly would have occupied, especially Ojibwa. If that helps, our buddy suggested a Pukwudgie. But I don't know enough about them to be able to guess. Haven't heard anything like this. Me neither. Probably a bear. Did it come from the house or the sea? I've had more than a few ghostly experiences in my life. Most of them can be chalked up to sleep paralysis, overactive imagination, and or maybe hopelessness, hopefulness to see a ghost. As I've gotten older, I've changed my stance from "I believe ghosts exist" to "I love the idea of ghosts and I love reading stories. Just can't really logically believe in them." However, this one episode is still puzzling to me. A few years ago, my significant other and I were on our 3rd vacation to Maui. After spending a week in Kihei, we decided to change it up a bit and we called for a friend of a friend who managed a vacation rental in Paia. The place she hooks us up with was a cute little guest cottage. It's out back of a larger house. The ocean was basically our backyard. This area was rocky, and the Paia Sea was often stormy, so it was more of a place to watch the waves from than to take a leisurely stroll on the beach. A family was staying in the big house, and the first night we stayed there, we made ourselves at home mixing up some poke, cooking steaks on a hot plate and dancing to old jazz on the radio. We were watching the big waves rolling up on the rocks until it got dark. The cottage was basically a studio with a nicely sized bathroom, freshly renovated and clean. We both slept well that night, and we were pleased at our reasonably priced quote-unquote find after spending so much money on the ritzy Kihei. The next day was Thanksgiving. The family in the big house was packing their car to leave as we exited our cottage to go enjoy Thanksgiving dinner and our friends who lived in Kula, upcountry. We spent several hours up there and returned to the cottage at about 8 that night, and right when we entered, we could both feel that the atmosphere had changed. It had become oppressive, and neither of us said anything to each other at that point. We prepped for bed and turned out the lights, only to spend the entire night unable to sleep. I remember a distinct feeling of doom hovering over me. I got the impression that whatever it was came either from the big, now empty house, or the sea. My significant other later said it felt like a demon was breathing down his neck all night. We both lay there like boards, unwilling to move, so as not to anger whatever it was. As the morning brightened into day, the feeling that something absolutely did not want us there persisted. We ended up packing as fast as possible, getting the hell out of there. After we left the property, he brought up his horrible feelings, and I agreed that I had also just spent the night in abject terror. Nothing physical happened, no weird sounds, just a strange, hostile presence that took over every inch of that place. Before writing this, I asked him to remember that night and what he thought that thing might be. He didn't want to discuss it. He did mention that he had felt it the first night, too. I had not. I remember a distinct cozy feeling that first night, as if everything was right with the world, and I've often wondered if the thing had been in the big house with the family. When they left, it came to visit us, though I have no idea if they felt anything really untoward at all. If it came from the sea, it would explain how utterly inhuman the thing felt to me, and the sea was stormy that night. But like many strange experiences, I'm sure I'll never get the answers to my questions. My house was crowded all the time. I was reading Jezebel's Scary Stories contest this year. I remembered something that happened frequently in a house I lived in more than a decade ago. It might not be scary to very many people, but I find it interesting, especially now that I no longer live in the house. It's a small 1920s or earlier farmhouse. It's nested up against the west hills of Portland. The steep hillside is about 20 feet away from the back door, which afforded us privacy and kind of a nice view of a very peaceful wall of trees. The house is very simple. A large front room and 2 bedrooms, then the kitchen and bath. The basement was a large room where the laundry and his pool table were, then a smaller room that led out to the garage. It was obvious to me that the kitchen was an add-on, because its floor rested on cement sort of footings about a foot above the ground, tall enough for the family of raccoons that lived under there. Basement walls stopped short of the kitchen area. My boyfriend at the time had lived there for 8 years, and I moved in after a few years of dating. His bed was set up in a small basement room, and after a while, whenever I stayed over, I'd wake up with a start and a panicked question of, "You going upstairs? You going to come back quickly?" That was at any slight movement of his, which he found pretty annoying, and rightly so. He had insomnia often and would spend a couple of hours trying to sleep, but ultimately go upstairs for the night and settle down in front of the TV, leaving me alone down here. The reason I got so neurotic about sleeping in that basement alone was that after he'd leave, I'd start hearing mumbled conversations, almost whispers, but not quite, and also not loud enough for me to understand any words. They wouldn't stop. It was like a sedate conversational party going on in the other basement room, continue until daylight. When I moved in with him, I asked him if we could move the bed up into the actual upstairs bedroom, which was empty, at least after his roommate had moved out. Thankfully, he agreed, and we set up my old bedroom set in the basement for guests. In the upstairs bedroom, it was quiet and peaceful. But then the whispering party seemed to move into the kitchen. It was basically nonstop whenever the TV and radio were off, and most often when I was home alone. He said he never heard it, but I would hear it when we were there as well. And when I did hear it, it didn't upset me or threaten me or anything, as long as I wasn't trying to sleep in the basement. The basement just scared me. It was just there and felt like the house was super crowded with boisterous guests and that they were paying no attention to me whatsoever, or having a fine old time in the next room. Sometimes I thought I was going crazy. It was all in my mind, especially when you could never hear it. And maybe it was all mental, but it was weird and it only ever happened in that house. We eventually moved 2 more times into even older houses, and I just love an elderly home. That's before we parted ways. I haven't heard whispering or groups of voices since then. The Curious Cyclist. Many years ago, I visited my older brother in rural Scotland. In the evening, we took a 40-minute drive to his friend's house. The road we took was mainly through fields and woods, close to a place named Gussie, or I can't even attempt that. I was in the passenger seat, and as the light began to fade, I spotted an unusual sort of sight up ahead. It seemed to be a mannequin wrapped in fairy lights. I imagined it might be advertising a business or be a prank of some sort, or maybe a road safety measure. As we got closer, I saw it was like a completely still figure mounted in a bicycle, facing the direction that we were traveling. What I originally thought were fairy lights were kind of LEDs, seemingly woven into a high-vis vest. The figure was tall and thin, and somehow I couldn't make out a face. My brother said he didn't know what it was and hadn't seen it before. Something about it gave me a chill. I asked my brother to remember the spot on the journey home so I could investigate more. After several hours, it was pitch black. I made the journey back. At the appropriate point, my brother said that we were near the spot. I had my eyes glued to the side of the other side of the road where we'd spied the figure earlier, and suddenly I saw it, but it had moved. It was again facing the way we were traveling. It was on my side of the road again. This meant that it had switched sides, but again was completely still. I tried to get a good look this time and turned my seat, but somehow couldn't get a clear view. I again felt a chill shiver, and my brother did too. He floored the accelerator and we sped away. Didn't speak much on the journey. When we got back, I asked if I could sleep in his bedroom floor instead of the spare room I'd been allocated. He agreed, and I was 30 at the time, brother 40. I don't understand what we saw, or even why we were so scared other than the oddness of the figure. Things that happened to me across the years. I've always been in a very religious family. I was even a father's assistant at a certain point, so the paranormal was never strange to me. Let's go for the examples. When I was like 7, I went with Grandma to my cousin's house, which was very far and isolated. And in the middle of nowhere, I heard a voice speaking my name, asking if everything was all right. When I was 14, I studied in a course for the entrance in university, and I studied a lot every day except Wednesday. During Wednesdays, I slept all day. In a particular Wednesday, I decided to sleep in the opposite side in which I sleep. I had a sleep paralysis episode. There were 3 figures looking at me, 2 equals on the sides and 1 in the middle. The ones on the sides were like nuns using veils, all dark with the eyes that were like a white and red light. The one in the middle was like a man that used a hat with all dark, but again the eyes, they were like red lights. I prayed and closed my eyes. They vanished after a while. Let's go for a more recent case. In October of last year, I went to Canada, first studying English, and stayed in a home of a family. They were religious too, but not the same religion. Kind of that pray loudly to God before every meal type. My host mother once asked me to pray to God loudly, and for the first time I did. And then that night I went to sleep and I felt happy and odd for some reason. Opened my eyes, and to my surprise, I was floating above my bed, and there with me was a very bright light that was orange and yellow at the same time. I felt happy for some reason looking at it. After a little while, the light disappeared. I stopped floating. Felt myself falling face first into my pillow, and then I slept. When I came back, I talked to 2 different fathers, and they both told me that that was God itself. One of these days, I went to my mother's room to show her a video clip of a song I really enjoy. While we're listening to it, I saw a white light at medium height, like 60 centimeters high. It was at the door for a while. I later told my mother about it, and she told me she saw the same thing before in that day. There are more stories, but that's enough for now. Ouija board experience. I've had paranormal and inexplainable experiences my whole life, but more often as a kid, like 9 to 15. I'd like to share those as well, but this one has been bothering me again recently. This happened in January 2020. I was 22. My sister was 15. And to make a very complicated long story short, we wanted to contact my ex-boyfriend. He had killed himself a few months prior in the house that we shared. I still lived there. We were always wary of Ouija boards, but we were desperate for answers. We turned off all the lights and lit candles, blessed the house and said the stuff. We were extremely careful to be respectful, follow all the rules. We connected with a few different entities, and the first one called itself Mama. We asked it if it knew my boyfriend, and it said yes, and that it could connect us. Something then said it was my boyfriend and said it loved us and said XD, which I assumed was like the laughing face that he would use. Then it said that Mama was evil and bad, asked us to come back tomorrow. We came back, and this time it was way worse. It was Mama again. Planchette was going so fast it was almost getting away from us. It seemed to really like my sister and kept jumping off the board toward her. It zoomed from M over to A and over, and it tried to say that it was my boyfriend again at one point, but it couldn't answer any questions about him or us, and I tried to ask what our anniversary was, and it just guessed. When I said it was wrong, it's like it got mad. Started zooming from 0 to 9 really fast, like it was doing for M and A. It said it was behind us, and my dog started going nuts. We said we were going to go, and it kept saying no, like it was mad and we weren't allowed to go. We eventually got it to say goodbye, and we've never used it again. In fact, I left it there when I moved. Neither of us would ever fake that kind of thing. I've read that it can be subconscious, but I don't know, that shit was wild. We felt so sick and off after, and she had bruises the next morning. We don't like to talk about it. Almost feels like it was a dream, but it wasn't. And the weirdest part is that when I think about it, I almost want to go back and do it again. I don't know why, because it was terrifying. My uncle's ghost. The events that I'm going to describe happened about 6 years ago. I lost my uncle from a brain tumor. It was cancerous. And after his funeral, me and my cousin, who's 8 years older than me, were sleeping in the terrace of his house. I woke up in the morning around 3 o'clock, and I saw my cousin staring at a tree which was behind the house. I got a bit confused and called his name, which he didn't respond at all now, and I was concerned about him, and I called him once again, and this time he looked at me. So I asked him what he was looking at this time and so late. His face was pale. He looked shaken. As I walked toward him, he stopped me midway and told me to go to sleep. When I insisted, he said that we'll talk about it in the morning. When I woke up in the morning, his bed was empty. So I went in the house and asked my aunt about him. Told me that he went to visit Father's memorial site early in the morning. When she asked him about why, and like such a hurry, he promised her to talk about it after returning back. It was so confusing, that instant in the morning and now this. So I told my aunt about the, previous night's events. She freaked out and immediately told me to get the car ready to go after him. We reached the memorial site in about 20 minutes. When we reached the spot, we saw him there at my father's grave, and he was wiping his tears. We immediately sat him down, gave him some water after he relaxed, and we asked him about what had happened last night. What he told us was shocking. He woke up because of the sound of someone or something calling his name. He thought that I was calling him, but I was asleep, so he looked around for the source of the sound and he couldn't find it. But after a few seconds, he once again heard the sound, now telling him to look behind the tree. When he looked at the tree, he was terrified and happy at the same time. It was his father who was standing behind the tree, and he shockingly stared at him, and he was wearing the same clothes that he wore at the time of his death. He waved at him and just vanished. My cousin was in complete shock, hence why he was unable to reply when I first called him. Spirit in the Stairwell. This is something that's been on my mind for quite a while, and after finding this subreddit, I thought this would be a great place to share my experience. I'd consider myself a skeptic, but one particular period of my life has always had me guessing. I simply have no explanation for what I experienced. I was around 11 years old when my family moved into a house that was built around the year 1910. It was a fairly large house, consisting of an unfinished basement, a main floor, and the attic. The attic had been converted some years earlier into a 2-bedroom and a bath. It was decided that my brother, 7 years younger, and I would share the 2 bedrooms in the attic. Starting from the first night in the home, I was uneasy and generally uncomfortable, especially when I was alone upstairs. Part of me wants to attribute this to my new surroundings, but who knows? The upstairs area in particular gave me the creeps. The long staircase up into the hallway was always dimly lit and led straight into a hallway, obscuring any line of sight that you would have from the bottom of the stairs. Just thinking about it gives me chills to this day. The first few months were uneventful. It was probably about 6 months into living in the home when I would get woken up in the middle of the night from what sounded like thumping coming from the stairwell. For some context, my bedroom wall shared a wall with the stairwell. It sounded like somebody lightly hitting the stairwell wall with their palm. Not a smack, not a knock, but a distinct thump. It did frighten me, but it would not last more than a few thumps. Then I would fall back asleep. This would happen about every other night for a week or so. Then I wouldn't hear the thumping again for maybe a month. I always dreaded it. In the periods of time I didn't hear the noises, I was relieved and optimistic in thinking it had gone away for good. But without fail, it would come back. It gave me a sinking feeling in my chest when I would wake up hearing the thumping on the other side of the wall. Then it would go away again for a few months. No one else in the house was hearing anything. My parents told me it was the house settling, of course. The thudding of the house settling, extremely normal. After I had accepted that this was probably not going to stop, I began to become increasingly uneasy in my bedroom, and the upstairs in general. I slept with my light on every night. I refused to spend any time in my room unless I was going to bed, but now I was 12 or 13 years old. I began to get an increasingly irritated feeling and stupidly confident about trying to find out what was causing this noise in the stairwell. If I was feeling particularly brave, I'd get out of bed, open my bedroom door, and flip on the hallway light. Nothing was ever there. Everyone in the house was sound asleep. And after closing the door and getting back into bed, the thudding would begin again. By this time, it had gotten significantly louder, but still occurring in the same frequencies before. And in hindsight, I might have made a mistake in being so confident in catching whatever it was that was making this noise. Around the same time, I started to have a very strange reoccurring dream about being in the bedroom, as if I were awake and there'd be a tall man peeking at me from around the corner of my doorframe. I never saw the man's full body, only half of his face and his shoulder. I distinctly remember his one eye gazing into my room. I couldn't explain it in any other way except it was incredibly unsettling. He would just stand there, nothing else. I don't believe this was a case of sleep paralysis. I had distinct transitions from being asleep to waking, and I knew it was a dream. By now, he'd been living in the house for a few years. My younger brother was now around 5 or 6. His reactions to whatever was going on really creeped me out. Up until now, I was the only one from what I knew having any kind of weird experiences in the house. On one occasion, my mom asked me why I was scaring my little brother at night. I wasn't particularly surprised about the question, because I would tease him sometimes. I asked her what she meant. She said that my brother had gone and woken her parents up and said that I kept hiding in his closet with my scary mask on. I did have some Halloween masks that he didn't like, but I certainly wasn't hiding in the closet in the middle of the night trying to frighten him. Hell, I was too scared to go into his room at night, let alone hide in his closet in the dark. I'm not sure what he was seeing, but it certainly was not me. When I was in middle school, I was feeling more comfortable being in the home alone, and I'd sometimes be at home alone all weekend, and my family went on camping trips that I did not want to go to. The thumping in the hallway hadn't happened in a long time, and I'd all but forgotten about it. I had other things in my mind, I suppose. It really never came up until I'd sometimes have friends spend the night with me while my parents were out of town. Eventually, it came to one of them asking me if my house was haunted, and I hadn't really talked with my friends about what I'd experienced in the house, so I was definitely surprised by them saying that they would be sleeping on the couch and hear what they described as windows opening and closing in the middle of the night. After that conversation, no one was jumping at the opportunity to stay at my house with me on the weekends. My family was out of town. And again, a while passed. Nothing out of the ordinary. I had again put it out of my mind. Sitting at my computer in the downstairs area on a Friday night waiting out on a friend, and his parents were going to come pick me up and go to an event. I was chatting away on MSN Messenger and I heard creaking coming from the upstairs hallway. And these were distinct footsteps. Not like the thumping on the walls. As I was listening, my mind was coming to the realization that I was home alone, and these footsteps were not from any of my family members or friends. The footsteps began rapidly coming down the stairs. Before I knew it, I jumped out of my seat and bolted out of the door to wait outside for my ride. Stood by the street in the middle of winter waiting on them to come pick me up, and I had this incredibly unsettling feeling that I was being watched from the upstairs window of my brother's room. I don't know what was causing the noise, and honestly, I'd rather never find out. That same night, stayed at my friend's house. Didn't say anything about the footsteps. I wanted to forget about it. The next day I came back home to my family, and after a few sleepless nights waiting on the thudding to begin again, it didn't. Everything stopped. The last experience I had. A few years later, my family moved out of the house. A few years after that, the house burned to the ground. Apparently, it was an electrical issue that caused the fire. And every once in a while, I'll share things with my brother, and he'll confirm that even with him being so young, he can distinctly remember being creeped out by that house. I'm 31 now, and I still don't know what it was I was experiencing. Can't explain any of it away, and I'm confident that it was very real. Haven't had any similar experiences since I heard these footsteps. Haunted camping. Since I, currently a 22-year-old male, was a child, the forest was like my second home, and so I decided my roommate, who happens to be one of my best friends, should definitely try it out. And of course, he agreed. We chose a spot in a forest the north of our country, close to my parents' native town. During the day, everything was normal. I actually had quite a lot of fun. What happened at night at around 3 a.m. We were woken up by what seemed to be the sound of people singing. Now, I swear we hadn't brought much alcohol. Definitely don't do drugs. So this was as weird as it got. It almost seemed like a religious chant or something. Of course, we immediately got out of the tent to see what was going on. There was nothing around us, as far as my friend's awful flashlight could show us. The singing was further away, but not too far. Didn't actually have time to think whether we wanted to go and check or go back to sleep. That's because a mere few moments later, something really quick ran right beside me. It was literally like a wind breeze, but strong enough to actually knock my friend off of his feet. I still have no idea what it was, but I swear to you, here and now, when I looked in the direction it went, I saw a naked man, over 2 meters tall. Only a second, though. Afterward, it disappeared, and I went to check on my friend, and he was unconscious. Of course, I immediately panicked and ran for a place with the least on my bar and my phone so I could call for help. I found a spot and began dialing, and I'm quite certain I saw a hooded person stalking me 10 meters away. He also disappeared quickly. I assumed this one was because of my adrenaline rushing through my veins and the darkness surrounding everything, but I rushed back to my friend and stood there until the authorities arrived. And as I'm writing this, it's been over 2 weeks. Friend got into a coma. Doctors are optimistic. Still have no idea what the hell was that. I don't know whether the hooded man was real or a figment of my imagination. Tall, naked guy was. I'm sure of this. Weird experience. Need some insight. I walk my dog around the neighborhood behind my apartment building daily. It's a quiet, sort of affluent residential area of LA. When I walk her, I generally either don't see anyone else or come across the same people I usually see out with their dogs. A couple of months ago, a house was torn down on the street to prep for a lot for new construction. And since then, I've been experiencing weird shit, and tonight was the most blatant. Fist instance. Oh no. About a month ago, it was later than normal. I'd passed out on the couch. Whoops. So, no one was out, there was no wind, and it was a very mild evening. Out of nowhere, I heard wind chimes, but not tingly normal ones. Sounded like one that's made with wood or shells. It was a deliberate shake, a pause, and a shake. My intuition was throwing alarm bells. My dog was visibly agitated. I did what any smart person would and pretended it didn't exist and calmly walked away. I knew it wasn't normal, though. I've lived in this area for 2+ years. Never heard that sound. Next instance. A couple of weeks after that, we were just walking a normal path. My dog starts going crazy at literal air. There's no one around and the area is well lit, so I would have seen a person. And since then, she's been on edge during walks and super reactive, more than her normal. She hates motorcycles. We're working on it. But anyway, once again, pretended it didn't happen and calmly walked away. Today, similar to the above, no one was around, and we'd passed a couple of neighbors at the beginning of the walk, but as we went further down the street, there was no one. We're passing the construction site, and my dog jumped and froze, staring into the site. It's completely fenced off, and her neighborhood is constantly patrolled by either private security or the fuzz, so I find it hard to believe there'd be a person in there. But I guess that's possible. Anyway, I was like, let's keep it moving and once again ignore. Keep going another block or so, and I hear a whistle. 2 notes, as if somebody was trying to get my attention. Again, ignore, and about a minute later, the same whistle happened, but much closer this time. The dog was on edge, and I may have muttered, "Oh, hell no." But I attempted to do the calm walk-away thing. I am hyper-aware of my surroundings at all times, and particularly at night, so I know there was no one around to make the whistle sound. Absolutely creeped me out, though. I'm wondering if anybody's had some insight on what it could be and what do I do to protect myself and my dog, because I'm way out of my depth. Spirit impersonates my dad. This took place about 5 years ago in the house I'm currently living in. My friend and I were waiting in my living room for my dad because he was on a ride to another friend's place. We were both 15 at the time, so we didn't have our licenses yet. He eventually poked his head around the corner to let us know he was ready. We both got up and walked around the corner and then entered the kitchen, which leads to my back door. As we entered the kitchen, turned toward the back, we both saw the side of my dad going around the corner to the back door. To the back left side of my kitchen, from where we were standing, there's an entryway with the 3 sort of short steps that go down to a small landing. It's where you can access the basement or the door to my backyard. We followed right behind him, but as we turned the corner, he wasn't there, and the back door was still shut and locked, which meant the only way he could have gone was to the basement. Thought this was very strange because he would have had to sprint down those steps in order to get out of our sight in that short time frame. Neither of us heard any commotion. At this point, I was weirded out, but figured he was pulling some sort of a joke on us. I began calling down the steps to him for a good 15 seconds with no responses. And at this point, my friend and I were starting to get slightly annoyed. Our buddy had been waiting on us for a good amount of time. I turned to look at my friend with a confused expression, when all of a sudden, we heard my dad begin to whistle from the living room where we had just came from. We both sprinted up the short landing, through my kitchen into the living room where we found my dad. I started freaking out, asking him how he was able to get from the back landing area back to our living room. He explained he'd never entered the kitchen after calling us, but instead turned the other way to my mom's office to let her know that we were leaving. My friend and I both clearly saw my dad, and to this day, it's one of the creepiest things that's happened to us. The apparition was crystal clear, not foggy or transparent like the way Hollywood makes ghosts look. It was like an exact replica of my dad. Knocking. I opened my eyes to a strange sight. I was levitating, floating just a few feet above the ground, looking down at what appeared to be a bedroom. Whose bedroom I was in was a mystery at the time, too dark for me to see. Directly below me lay a person sleeping soundly. And as my eyes adjusted to the lack of light, I started to recognize something about this room. It was mine, looking down at me, sleeping peacefully. At that realization, I began to feel dread and unshakable fear that something was not quite right. And that's when the knocking started. It started as a light tapping coming from the closet opposite the foot of my bed, and it was slow, and with each knock followed about every minute or so. Despite this, the real me dozed on as I watched from my vantage point. After a few minutes, the knocking got louder and more violent and rapid, as if somebody was trying to bang the door down. The thunderous pounding shook the door in its frame and filled the room with a deafening boom. Still, I remained asleep, completely oblivious to the noise. My gut wrenched as a sense of dread became worse. The room held a sinister feeling, an atmosphere of tension blanketing the space. The knocking stopped, and for a moment, the unease I felt was beginning to fade away. Then the closet doorknob turned, squeaking obnoxiously as it did so. It was a slow turn, as if whatever was opening the door was making sure not to wake my sleeping self. The feeling in my gut reached its peak as my stomach grew tighter and the door slowly pushed open, its hinges squeaking almost as loudly as the door handle. Still, I slept on. As the door swung open, the air smelled of decay and became heavy with the scent. Out stepped a crouched figure, one with arms long and gnarled, with pale skin pulled taut around jagged bones and twisting joints. Its hands, with long skeletal fingers so thin the tendons were bulging, ended in long yellowed nails. Its feet just the same, Its face was that of a horror movie monster. Its head was thin and incredibly long. Its chin tapered at a dull point. Its wide, lipless mouth beheld long, rotting black teeth set in equally black gums. Its eyes were a black darker than anything I'd ever seen, so wide and far apart that it was barely human-looking. Slowly and quietly, it lumbered toward my bed. The real me still passed out and outstretched its impossibly thin arm toward my chest. It dug its long, rotting nails deep into me and drew blood and followed with its other hand and slowly pulled apart the skin and muscle of my sleeping torso with a sickening, wet ripping noise. That revealed the writhing guts that lay inside, and it shoved its face deep into the cavity it had just made, and when it lifted its head again, my small intestine hung out of its teeth. My eyes bolted open and I jumped up, dripping sweat, felt my chest, and sure enough, it was in one piece. Then I heard knocking. Remember that horrible, gruesome image I had witnessed moments before? I tried my hardest not to empty my stomach and bolted out of the room. I quickly pushed the door shut and locked it tightly before running to the living room. There I grabbed my phone, slipped into the space between my couch and the wall, trying my best not to make any sound and calm my breath. Don't have much charge left in this thing, and typing this only drains it more, and I can only hope that whatever that damn thing was can't get to me. I just phoned 911 and they're sending over a guy to check out the house, and I swear I just heard that closet doorknob squeak. I think the restaurant I work in is haunted. The earliest occurrence happened a couple of months after I started working there. It was during the early winter months, and the outdoor patio part of the restaurant was closed. During this time, managers did not like the doors... During this time, managers did not like my voice. And they also didn't like the doors to the patio being open or left open for obvious reasons. And on one particular day, a manager nearby noticed that one of the patio doors were opened a little bit and walked over to shut and lock it. But I swear that I saw the door close tightly on its own before the manager had reached it. Now, it wasn't that windy or stormy out. New Jersey winters don't really get that bad until January. And even if it was, there's heavy doors that require a fair bit of effort to actually close tightly. I may have just seen it wrong, but I'm positive that the door closed by itself. The second and most disturbing occurrence happened just a couple of months ago. And for context, I'm standing by the polishing station in the kitchen. I'm chatting with a coworker. I stood up against the coffee station with the wall directly behind me, meaning that nobody could have gotten behind me. The closest person to my left was a good 3 feet away. Couldn't have possibly moved fast enough that I wouldn't notice. To my right was the polishing station. What do you polish in a restaurant? On the other side of the table is my coworker to my right, and I'm standing there mid-conversation, and I feel something touch my shoulder. It felt almost like someone clamping on it for a split second. I immediately froze, and my friend noticed my look of fear. And I should emphasize that nobody on my left could have possibly tapped my shoulder, then walked 3 feet away without me noticing them. And no one could have been behind me. I was against a counter and my back toward the wall. I concluded that perhaps it was a ghost of some sort and kind of just trying to shake it off, and even then, I remember the touch clear as day. I still think about it quite often. The last occurrence happened earlier this week. I'm walking from the break room in the basement to the stairway, led to the kitchen, and just as I opened the door to the stairs, I heard what sounded like a recording of a woman laughing for barely a second. Keep in mind, no one else was on those stairs at all. Rationally, I thought it could have just been the people in the break room down the hall that I heard, and except that room was 10 feet to my left, while the laughter I heard was much closer and on my right. Brushed it off, and it didn't really freak me out that much, though I must admit it was kind of unsettling. To top it all off, I've heard coworkers talking about similar experiences in the restaurant. Apparently, most of the employees believe that it's haunted in some way. Quite a few have talked about their own experiences in passing. I'm not really scared of the place since I haven't had too many weird things happen to me there, but I'm pretty sure the restaurant might be haunted in some manner. When I was a child, a poltergeist shook my bed uncontrollably, and I'll never forget about it. So when I was little, like 6 or 7, I'm laying in bed trying to sleep for the longest time. I just couldn't. I remember looking at my digital clock and saw that it was just a little bit past 3. The way my bedroom was located in my house at the time, I could look through my doorway through the hall into our den and TV room. That's where my dad was watching TV. My whole room was dark, with the exception of the minimal amount of light that was being emitted from the den where my dad was. Then all of a sudden I got the eerie sense that something was wrong or bound to happen. I was really scared, so as children, we kind of do when they're in bed and are scared. I covered my entire body with my sheet. After I did this, I felt like as though, and also sensed that there was a face or presence right over mine, just on the other side of the sheet. Then all of a sudden, my bed started to jolt and shake violently as if there were 6 people or so underneath, full-on kicking. Like, kicking the underside of my mattress with all 4 corners in the center as if they were on their backs and had full leg length to do so. All 4 corners as well as the center of my bed were being jolted up and back down in the box spring. It was happening again and again, and the bed was being jolted and shook. I'm sure what was only mere seconds seemed like minutes of having to endure this conscious nightmare. I just remember looking and seeing my father in the other room and trying to scream, but nothing would come out, not even a squeak. All I wanted was for him to come into the room and take witness to what was happening, and maybe stopping it from happening, or maybe scoop me up and take me out of there, I don't know. Neither would happen. I know I wasn't dreaming or imagining this because it went from that happening to continuing to happen. Like standing up in the bed while this is still going on to getting a running start on bed and then land in the hallway. I didn't want what I could only imagine might be underneath my bed to get me. Then went straight into our den and TV room where my father was. Then all I could do was look and stare into my dark room and know that at some point I was going to have to go back in there and get into that same bed. I was terrified. I still remember this event as if it were yesterday. Never did find out if the house had somebody die in it while they lived there. It still makes me wonder about it. In this case, I have to lean toward the supernatural. There's a lot of other things about the house that weren't kind of off-putting, in a real creepy, ghostly, demonic way. Would never want this to happen to me now. Possible spirit, trapped energy. This happened to me when I was in maybe 4th grade, and I'm 28 years old now. It's seared into my brain. This is so significant that my parents and brothers still remember when it happened. I live in a small town in rural North Carolina. We have an old plantation in the middle of town that has old furniture in it. You can tour the house and the grounds. The grounds include slave quarters, which are super sad to see. When I was in 4th grade, our class took a trip to this place and the tour guide walked us around and told us about the history of the place. Even at 9 years old, I had this immense sadness when we toured the slave houses, learned about the slavery that took place there. Anyway, we went to the house and were walking up the stairs, and at the top of the stairs, there was an African-American lady sweeping in silence. That was as we were walking up. She looked as real as anyone else in the room, but she just stood against the wall at the top of the stairs to our right as we walked up. She's wearing a long light blue dress with a dirty apron, and her hair was pulled back into a low bun of sorts. I looked up at her and smiled, half expecting the tour guide to introduce us. The lady smiled a little at me, and I got a very warm, nice vibe from her, but I remember her eyes looked very sad. We finished the tour, and I sort of forgot about the lady, and when we left the upstairs, I asked where the sweeping lady was. The tour guide looked perplexed and asked what I was talking about. I described her, and the tour guide, who was white, said that there were no African-American staff members there. I remember being mad that they wouldn't tell me who she was, and it never dawned on me that she could have been a spirit. I was so adamant that, well, she was there, that my teacher ended up telling my mom, who was the school secretary. I found out later as an adult that my teacher and the tour guide were freaked out. I'll never forget that lady I saw, and her sad eyes. It really makes my heart break to think that she's still sweeping the stairs. It may sound dumb, but why would she be doing this in her afterlife? It leads me to believe that perhaps I saw something like trapped energy or something. Any ideas? Heard creepy music in the woods. Earlier today, I'm in the woods doing some fishing. It's on a relatively small lake in a small one-person dinghy boat. I was in the dead center of this lake and had caught a few fish. Decided the spot I was at was getting pretty quiet for bites. Decided to bring up my anchor and look for a new spot. I'm setting down my anchor in the boat, and I started to hear this extremely unnerving music. It's hard to describe it, but it was almost like a metallic-type sounding instrument with like very horror-type sounds to it. Had about 10 or 12 notes repeating. I assumed it had to be some sort of thing in my boat making the sound. It sounded like it was very close and all around me. Checked my anchor, thinking somehow maybe that made the music. Checked my phone, which was on silent, and had, well, basically no reception at all, and eventually just stayed dead still and listened. After excluding everything and hearing it clear as day, it freaked me the hell out, and I decided to get out of there as soon as possible. I'm not sure if it stopped or if maybe I couldn't hear over my paddling by the time I reached shore, though, but it was gone. To put more context, I was alone and extremely deep in the wilderness where very few vehicles can reach, and seeing people in the area is an extreme rarity. Beyond that, the lake I was at only had one access road, and there's no sign anybody be coming that way. The music also didn't sound far away or echoey. It was quite clear and very eerie. It also sounded nothing like any kind of wind chime or any kind of wildlife. I've frequented this lake for many years. Never heard it before, but I am certain it was absolutely melodic and had musical intention behind it. Not just wind or trees banging sort of together, you know. Just for a last bit of context, this was in the Okanagan area of British Columbia. Hopefully one of those pronunciations is close. Admittedly, not paranormal, but curious. A couple of years ago, I'm sleeping in my fiance's house. I had a really strange dream. Very realistic. I was in my house, everything was normal. I walked down my hallway toward my master bedroom, which is normally the last room on the right of my hallway. But I noticed there was an extra door just past mine, and in the dream I knew the door shouldn't be there, that I'd never been in that room. I went in and it looked very similar to my room, but the furniture was arranged differently. Went to the dresser and opened the drawers, and it was filled with my old schoolwork and school projects. There was a distant droning and monk-like chanting coming from the distance. I turned and started walking to the large windows at the far side of the room, but as I got closer, the light from the windows became brighter, bright white to the point I couldn't get close enough to look out. The chant got louder too, frightened me too much, and I ran out of the room and woke up. That morning, while still in bed and chatting with my fiancé, I mentioned that I'd had a nightmare and briefly recounted it to him. And he's not easily rattled. He's not a religious or paranormally inclined person, but he got a strange look in his face as I told him my dream. Then he told me he had had a dream that night that he and my father had built a strange addition onto my house, like a rickety extended room just past where my room would be. They then started working on a shed by the pond in the backyard and stopped to look up at this weird, shitty room they built. Okay. Dogman, Wolfman sighting in the Oregon coast. So, I set a live trap for a mouse last night. Catch and release. Can't stand to harm mice. Triggered at midnight and the loud pop of a door woke me up. I decided I didn't want to just leave it in the cage all night long waiting for morning. I could hear him trying to chew through the wires and I didn't want him to torture himself or get hurt attempting to get out. So I decided I'd just take him outside immediately. Instead of releasing mice in the yard by my house, I always go about 3 miles into a forested area, and I'm not cruel enough to just release them by someone else's house. That would cause them a problem. But anyway, before I even got to my car to transport the little mouse, my stomach began hurting like never before. It was a horrible, foreboding feeling that almost was telling me something terrible was about to happen. There was no reason for my stomach to just suddenly start screaming in pain, and I essentially never have stomach problems like this. It's exceedingly rare, I just don't get stomach aches. But this was painful on a scale that was so strange, and I kept getting this deep sense of something being wrong. I got into the car with this little cage, going down the street, and it was literally only 1 block away from my home, and I instantly slowed on the brakes because of something enormous at the side of the road. At first I thought, well, that's got to be the tallest dog I've ever seen. Its silhouette was blacker than the night, and as I slowed my car from maybe 20 miles to 10 miles an hour, it suddenly came out into the street light. It walked across the street in front of my car. It wasn't running. It wasn't going slow either. I suddenly realized it was no ordinary dog. I knew it wasn't a bear either because it didn't have much of a belly. This was 3 to 4 times the size of a wolf, so I can confirm it was not a wolf. And what I saw looked like a humanoid literally hunched over on all fours with a back erect and hunch, moving with pace across the road. The head was distinctly wolf-like and enormous. Literally looked like a giant wolf head. That being had jet black fur, as black as hair can get. The legs were lanky and my brain literally froze. Instantly I began rationalizing, but it was fairly impossible to rationalize what I'd just seen. Closest thing I can compare this to maybe be the werewolf from Harry Potter, the one that Professor Lupin turns into. All I can think of is, how did they know? And that's nearly identical to what this thing looked like as it's hunched over and walking on all fours. It's horrifying. It was literally quite accurate to be looking like that exact CGI rendering. It was on all fours and his backside maybe 4.5 feet in height. Head was higher, easily reaching 5 feet. Again, there's no way this was a bear or any other regular beast we're familiar with as humans. There was nothing familiar about it. To anybody who might say, maybe it's just a really large dog that was sick and hunched, definitely no. It was bigger than the largest dog breeds I've ever seen. To be over 4 feet in height at the back, not the head, while hunched over. Definitely not a regular dog. Impossible to be a bear, as none are this skinny. The humanoid aspect of it couldn't be denied. You could tell that if it wanted to, it could easily stand up on 2 legs. And what's more insane is that I could feel its energy, and the energy was dark and oppressive and just really had a sense of danger sweeping over me. It had this otherworldly energy about it. To continue, I slowly continued driving. I quickly stared over to the left side of the road as I was passing to see where it was going. I was able to see its silhouette by a bush, and looking back at me, watching me pass. I didn't want to stop. I was scared. I went on with my mission to release the mouse, but I can tell you this. When I got home, I ran into my garage and shut the garage door as quickly as possible. I was panicked and truly terrified. When you know what you saw, you know what you saw, they always say. So no, my mind didn't just fill in the blanks or hallucinate this. And last night I looked up stories of Dogman, only to find people's descriptions and drawings being fairly identical to what I'd witnessed. What are the odds of that? Now I'm convinced it was real, and never thought in my wildest dreams I'd see something like this. I didn't know Dogman was a paranormal thing, but my dog's name is Dogman because he's half dog, half man, but looks like a little dog. What did I just see? Basically, my parents had taken my little girl for a walk to the park. I haven't been feeling very well. Been quite dizzy and sick for the last week or so. Super tired as well, so I was glad of the break. They were gone about an hour, and I lay on the bed enjoying the peace and quiet. When they got home, we sat in the living room together just chatting. I was sitting on my armchair facing the window, and my mom and daughter and my dad were sitting on the couch under the window facing me. My dad suddenly said he felt funny, and his vision had gone kind of funny. It alarmed me, so I looked up to ask if he could get a migraine. When to the side of him, this long, white, almost string thing appeared. I don't know how to describe it, at least to do it justice, but it was the length of my upper torso. It wasn't see-through, but it wasn't solid either. Almost like smoke or liquid the way it moved. It appeared by his head, and in shock I shouted, "Dad!" To my surprise, he really calmly replied, "I know, I see it too." This long hair, like smoke fog, string-like thing moved from the side of his head around the front of his body and eventually disappeared between him and my daughter on the couch. Both myself and my dad were excitedly exclaiming, "Did you see that? Do you believe that?" So we both saw the same thing. It didn't move particularly quickly either. My mom had sat beside my daughter the whole time but didn't see it. Just to mention, I'm not a smoker, and nobody in my family smokes. There were no candles lit, no open windows, and I checked the sofa afterwards to see if it had been a cobweb falling or a stray hair, and there was nothing. That's interesting. What is going on in my house? So about a month ago, one of my friends and his kid, who's 3 years old, were visiting. His kid fell asleep, so he decided that we're going to call it a night. He picked up his son and headed toward my bedroom door. I was in front of him and walked down my stairs first and turned around when I get to the bottom of the steps, waiting for them to get to the bottom. His son turns and looked at me with a terrified face and pointed to the top of the stairs and started trembling and saying, "No, please don't get me." It was creepy, but we just laughed it off. I mean, toddlers can say some spooky things. Fast forward to this morning. I woke up at 4:45 to my alarm to wake my girlfriend up for work. She got sick in the middle of the night and moved from our bed to the couch in the living room. I went downstairs to wake her, and her eyes were black and she was staring at the wall. It took me a second to realize her eyes were open, and it scared me, so I jumped back, and as soon as I did, she closed her eyes. She wasn't ever awake. That was weird, but she does weird things in her sleep from time to time, so it wouldn't have really bothered me. But the thing is, as soon as I jumped back, her eyes shut and the light in the loft room, just in the living room, flipped on. The loft door slammed shut. We were both downstairs, and nobody else was here. So then my next alarm went off at 5:10. She finally woke up and said, "I almost woke you up last night. Woke up randomly and got really scared, and the dog started barking at nothing. So I rolled over to get up and wake you up, but you must have fallen asleep before you even got off the couch." After that, she got ready for work like normal and left. A little while later, I got paranoid and sent a text to my little brother asking if he was okay. Told me I just woke him from a dream where he was being dragged into hell, so that didn't really help my anxiety. We thought we've heard doors close, and we heard weird noises and what sounded like footsteps, but it's always been chalked up to us sleeping or a regular house creak and things like that. Nothing like this has ever happened. I'm usually not off on Saturdays, but I wasn't scheduled for today for whatever reason, so I'm home alone and pretty scared. What could this be, and what do I do to stop it and make sure it doesn't happen anymore? Keep it from getting worse?